Good morning, Father.
Good morning to you. How are the kittens? They're not kittens.
We might be joined
They're
by
adult cats.
we might be joined by these cats if they don't leave me
A guest.
alone. Yeah. They are quite persistent kitties. So right now they're good, but they're leaving me alone. So this is nice.
Okay.
All right. So we have been talking about the martyrs, kind of modern martyrs, right? Starting around in the 1500s. They're by no means the first, by no means the last, or the most modern.
Correct.
And so we're talking about these things, I guess, one, because we're nerds and we love our history. But
we need to lean into that, right?
Yes, embrace the nerd. But
embrace the nerd.
But there's, I don't know. I think I like history. I think there's a lot of value to knowing what has happened in the past, right? And really trying to understand it.
Yeah. I forgot who said it, but some historian said, or some philosopher said, those who do not know history are condemned to repeat it, right?
Yeah,
we should learn from history, right? So
we're really trying to, well, myself at least, I'm really trying to lean into learning about the martyrs of the past. What does this allow me to do? How does this allow me to grow? What does this mean to me to hear all these kind of stories? What is it about myself that I can kind of connect with or see? You know, like the one thing that I think comes to everyone's mind when they hear some of these stories is, would I have the courage to do such a thing? Right. And I would really, really like to hope that I would, but man, I know that is a scary thing to even consider, especially when you hear
can you crucify me on a Nerf cross?
Yeah. Yeah, just a little bit. Be gentle, right?
Gentle,
to have my guts cut open. You know, and before, like in front of me, like while I'm still alive, before they allow me to die. Like, man, it's horrific, and it's terrifying. Yeah. Anyway, so those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about, and today we're gonna be.
And I think it's the courage of the few it's the courage of the few that inspire others to courage as well. So.
Yeah, and it definitely, the courage of those few, hopefully.
So are you the one to inspire others? Do you have the courage to be the one that encourages others, right?
Yeah, and hopefully to drive change, so those kinds of things, so that we don't all have to do those types of things, right? Today we're talking about the Japanese martyrs. And this started kind of the same time frame, really, back in the mid 1500s. And we are all going to be just blown away by your ability to pronounce these Japanese names. I know it.
I apologize to any listeners of Japanese descent if I absolutely torture these names in my attempts. So I want to talk a little bit about the Japanese martyrs. And so the gospel reached Japan, especially through the efforts of St. Francis Xavier, who is a Jesuit priest. And Francis Xavier arrived in Japan in 1549. And when he got to Japan at the same time, there was a lot of division in Japan itself. It had just freed itself from Chinese power. There was a lot of confusion in different lords, feudal lords vying for power. So a lot of stuff is happening politically as well in Japan at this time. So the feudal lords at first welcomed Francis Xavier and the Jesuit missionaries. They welcomed them because they saw them as a possible leverage to use against the Buddhist and Shintoist centers of learning in Japan that had become very, very powerful. Of course, there's this cultural embrace of Shintoism and Buddhism, and they were looked to as teachers, and so they were very highly respected, and so they started gaining a lot of power and influence in Japan. And the feudal lords saw them as competing. They were competing for power over the people, and so the feudal lords then saw that these Catholic missionaries might help them draw away people from the Buddhist and Shintoist centers of learning. So several powerful lords and a lot of the nobility from central Japan embraced the Catholic faith. A lot of them entered by 1563, were being baptized and embracing the fullness of the faith. Many of these lords then, because they were lords over their territories, they induced the people that lived in their territories to take catechism classes, not necessarily to force them to enter the faith, but exposing them to this other perspective, this other way of approaching life and understanding life. So that was in 1563. And then in 1574, there began a movement towards the conversion to the faith. A lot of people started embracing it for whatever reason. This led to a growing political tension. So as more and more important figures embraced the faith, there was resentment in the Buddhist and Shintoist centers as well. And there was a growing fear in the central government in the unity that they perceived among the Catholic feudal lords. Eventually, this fear turned into a fear of these Catholics inviting foreign powers into Japan. Why? Well, because they're all Catholics, they all believe the same thing, there's a unity of values, and if the leader of their faith is someone that lives in Europe, are they going to be open to European invasion? And so all of this stuff starts to happen. The same thing that happened in the United States when Kennedy was elected president. The big fear was that the Pope is going to be our president. Like, you don't understand anything about the Catholic faith.
Yeah. Well, and it seems really, really similar to what was going on. Like, it's the same thing in Europe. It's just a micro scale of everything that was going on in Europe. Like, where's the power really coming from?
Exactly. And that was the big fear, right? People in power don't want to share their power. So this tension continued to increase as trade, so now we have the economic factor here. Trade began to happen more between Japan and the Philippines. And as that trade grew, the Philippines were under Portuguese power. So you have, in the world view, you have Spain and Portugal competing in the world. And so the Philippines were under the Portuguese. And so as the Philippines is trading with Japan, Japan becomes aware of the fact that the Portuguese dominate the Philippines, and so now they're wondering, like, is the same thing going to happen to us? Is the Portuguese king going to come and take us over? Right? Again, the fear of European intervention or European taking over the Japanese structure. So that was in 1574 where all this stuff is happening. So then 1596, there's a cargo ship, the San Felipe, was blown off course, and they were forced to make port in the port of Urudu. The captain, then, being forced to the port, in his attempt to intimidate the port authorities to leave him alone, he's talking about the power of the Portuguese king and how they're taking over the Philippines. So if they don't leave him alone, then the king is going to come and invade their land and take over Japan. So they better leave him alone. So, of course, that didn't work out the way he wanted it to. So the ship's cargo is confiscated. the captain is sentenced to death. The Franciscan friars who were on this ship try to intervene on the part of the captain of the ship, and they're sentenced to death as well for intervening and trying to interfere in this. So then the hostilities between the various European powers comes into play again. People are vying for Japan for trade, so the Portuguese and the Spaniards and the Dutch and the British, all these things, these greater political entities see Japan as a potential for trade. So, of course, that's when things start to break down. So because of this threat that the Portuguese were going to come and take over Japan, that begins the first general persecution. And so that persecution broke unexpectedly on the night of July the 24th, 25th, 1587. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, there we go, see, I got that out, decreed the dismissal of the Catholic general and feudal lords. The feudal lord Justice Takayama Ukon. He was a general. He was a powerful person. So Toyotomi Hideyoshi sees like, okay, so you're a Catholic, so I'm going to dismiss you because I can't afford to have you in my army, because what if you're a spy, right? Oh, the whole conspiracy theorist starts again, right? So the fifth column, are you here to weaken my army? So he dismisses this Catholic general. And then Hideyoshi, again, there's an emperor, but he's basically a figurehead, but Hideyoshi was the most powerful feudal lord. He issues a decree of banishment for all foreign missionaries, and they were to leave the country within 20 days. So Nagasaki, the port of Nagasaki, used to be administered by the Catholic Church. It was sort of like the territory of the Catholic Church, and they were taking care of all the port and all the commerce with European ships. So the port of Nagasaki is taken away from the church, and as well as some other smaller ports. So the jurisdiction of the church is taken away from these ports, because what if they allow Europeans in to take over Japan? So that happens. Then in 1588, Hideyoshi ordered the destruction of Jesuit houses and churches in the regions of Setsu, Harima, and Mino. Hideyoshi then assumes the title of Kampau. Basically, it's a court title, and he begins to take on some of these court titles, but he cannot claim himself emperor because he is not of the aristocracy. He's not of noble birth. So he can be a very powerful general, but he takes these titles of protector and stuff. So he is one of the three chief unifiers of Japan, trying to unify Japan into a modern nation. So they lived under the weak, as I said earlier, a weak ceremonial emperor. So, and then in 1590, Hideyoshi holds three priests hostage and communicates with the superior of the Jesuits and says, you need to answer this banishment. You have to acknowledge the banishment, not only from your head of the order, but the viceroy of the Indies, or whoever represents the king in the Indies over the Philippines and that area. You need to acknowledge that you're banished and you're not going to come. You need to acknowledge this banishment. That doesn't happen. So then in 1592, a large church in Nagasaki is destroyed in August. And so the materials are repurposed, and they're repurposed because Japan also happens to find itself in a war with Korea. And so the war with Korea was from 1592 to 1598. So again, in Hideyoshi's ascension to power, Hideyoshi assumes another court title, Taiko. And so it's again, the sort of like the higher person. He is the image or the seal or the speaker for the country of Japan. So in 1597, Hideyoshi condemns 26 Christians to death. There are 6 Franciscans, 3 Japanese Jesuits, 17 Japanese laypersons, and they were martyred on February 5th of 1597 in Nagasaki. The governor of Nagasaki orders all priests to leave for Macau, which is a Portuguese territory off the coast of China across from Hong Kong. So again, the banishment, you all have to leave. 1598. By February of 1598, 130 churches have been burnt in the territories of Arima and Omaru. Hideyoshi dies in September of 1598, and so there's a temporary end to the persecution of the faith because civil war breaks out. Who now there's this powerful Lord has died, so who's going to take over that position? So civil war breaks out by the battle between the house of Totoyomi Hideyoshi and that of Tokugawa Ieyasu. They come to an impasse in 1560. Tokugawa Ieyasu is the leader at the moment, and even though there were Catholic lords that were fighting against him on the side of Hideyoshi, he allows the practice of the faith. There is religious tolerance from 1601 to 1612, generally speaking. So then there's an incident that happens during this time. In 1606, in Miyaku, a Christian was being executed, a Christian criminal was being executed, and another Christian that was there, another Catholic, knelt to pray for this person's soul. The Japanese culture saw this as worship. So when the person, this Catholic, knelt to pray for this person's soul, they understood it as a worship of this criminal, which then meant a worship of what? Disorder, chaos, not listening to government and stuff. So all of a sudden,
breaking the law and stuff.
Yeah, breaking the law. Yeah, so the worship of someone who broke the law. So then what happened then in 1606, because of this, all Christians in the nation were required to register with the government. So later on, in 1614, missionaries were banished by Tokugawa Ieyasu. They were banished from Japan again, and the suppression of the faith began in earnest. There was, again, another short political distraction from the persecution of the church because the son of Hideyoshi, the guy that was in power before, his son, Hideyori, had come to age, and he was attempting to regain power. So there's a fight between the house of Hideyoshi and his son Hideyori and the house of Tokugawa Ieyasu. Hideyori, Hideyoshi's son, attempting to gain power, he dies in the battle at the fall of Osaka. So Tokugawa Ieyasu's son, Hidetada, assumes power, and he publishes a new ban against Christianity in 1616. In 1618, some people attempted to rescue a Dominican priest from imprisonment because all these priests were in prison. A lot of the catechists were in prison, and a lot of people died in prison. They were in prison for years. So some people were trying to rescue this Dominican priest from prison in Hirado. So what happens is then, Hidetada, who's now in power, he orders that all the monks in the prison, the captain of the ship that had brought them to Japan from Manila, all incarcerated missionaries, and all the men that had hidden them or had hosted these missionaries to be burnt alive. He orders the beheading of all the wives and sons of the hosts, all Christians of that street upon which they lived, the hosts with their wives and sons, all the sailors and passengers of the ship that the missionaries had come on, all of them, wives and sons of the martyrs, they're all to be put to the sword. A complete and total extermination.
Yeah, that escalated quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Holy cow.
Yes. So like I'm going to put nip it in the bud. I'm going to eliminate anyone that is associated with this. Anyone, and again, it is sort of like making an example of this to scare everybody else into submission.
You know what
So
pops into my head?
that's go ahead.
Jumps into my head about that is it's real similar, kind of Old Testament when the Israelites are going out and conquering the Promised Land. There's some people where
Yes.
God is like, all of them, like man, woman, child, all of them. You have to destroy all of them, because if
Right.
any of them are still there when you're done, like you're going to be tempted, and then you're going to, for the Israelites,
Right.
you won't be faithful to me because you're going to go worship their gods and stuff like that. So I can see that same kind of logic here with the Japanese.
Yeah, the fear of contamination,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you have to be sure that you eliminate it all. So this is just really, it just becomes an all-out war against the church as Japan tries to unify itself. It's fighting Korea, it's fighting European influence. All this stuff is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happens then is, as Hidetada gets older, he transfers his power over to his son, Iemitsu, in 1623. So Iemitsu is in power from 1623 to 1651, and it is because he reigns for such a long time that the Japanese church is completely severed from contact with the outside world and the larger church. There is no contact within Japan with the outside. So there's a complete annihilation of the church within Japan. So then Iemitsu then confirms anti-Christian laws and is constantly seeking out hidden missionaries. So he enforces a law or passes a law that says correspondence with priests outside of Japan is a capital offense. So then torture becomes more cruel or crueler to punish not just the guilty, but also, as I said before, to terrorize others. There's a long series of martyrdoms of priests and laymen that fill the next years of the dying church in Japan. But side by side with the heroic martyrs, we have defectors and apostates. So this is part of, we talked earlier about the book Silence and the movie Silence.
Yeah.
It's during this time after the Shimabara uprising. So the next thing that happens then is, because of this continual persecution of the Catholic Church, then we have in Japanese history, or the history of the martyrs, something that is called the Shimabara uprising. So the total collapse of the church is sealed with the Shimabara uprising that was in 1637 to 1638. It was initially led by farmers from what had been an entirely Christian region, the Shimabara region. They were led by the son of a samurai, a Catholic samurai, and he became their leader. And so they began to protest the government and the persecution of the faith, the persecution of the farmers, right? The oppression then. Mm-hmm. And so they all gathered together as an army, and they were chased down by the army of the central government. And they were besieged at the abandoned fortress of Hara in the region of Arima. So they were besieged by 100,000 soldiers of the central government. The fortress falls in April of 1638, and all 37,000 men, women, and children were put to death. In 1639, the usual Portuguese sailing ships that came to trade were turned away and were forbidden to return under the pain of death. So this is the part where you have a lot of the Catholics that are hiding. They maintain the faith without priests, without missionaries. They try to hold on to the faith as best as they can. until Japan opens its borders again. But this is part of the Japanese martyrs. So in 1597, we had what we celebrate in the Catholic Church today is the Holy Martyrs of Nagasaki. So back in 1597, they were martyred on February 5th in Nagasaki, and among them we have the native Japanese Jesuit priest Paul Miki. So we'll usually celebrate that in the church of Paul Miki and Companions, because he was a Japanese Jesuit. He was the first native Catholic priest that was martyred. And you also have amongst that group Mexico's first martyr, the proto-martyr of Mexico, Felipe de Jesus, who was a Franciscan. So then there was another 205 blessed martyrs that were killed between the years of 1617 and 1632. So in total, we had 3,171 were executed in the late 1600s. 874 of them died in prison. Plus, you have the 37,000 that were martyred at the Shimabara uprising. So there's different estimations of the number of Christians and Catholics that were killed during this persecution. Some say it can be over 300,000 that have been executed or put to death. So again, there is the book written by Indo, Silence, which is about the persecution and the apostasy of some of the priests, how they turned away from the faith to save others, because I think we talked the last time when we talked about the martyrs in Japan. It was like, okay, if you don't apostatize, we're going to kill all these other people. So now you have to choose: do I apostatize to save these other people from getting killed? And so does my apostasy, is it a real apostasy, or am I doing this to save those others? So you have the book The Silence, you have the movie by Scorsese, The Silence as well. And if anybody's interested in reading fantasy books, there is a whole series called the Tales of the Otori that deals with some of what they call the hidden. It's a very kind of fantastical, feudal, samurai fantasy, kind of interesting storyline, the Tales of the Otori. But so it also addresses some of the hidden. They called the hidden, which were the Catholics that were hiding. So very interesting history in Japan and the persecution. And so again, earlier we talked about the corruption and the power and the complete corruption of complete power. One of the things that they would do, and you see this in the movie The Silence and in the book The Silence, what they would do is they would bind the person very tightly with ropes, bind them very tightly, then hang them upside down from ropes down into a pit. And so what would happen is, so the person will die, so they bind them very tightly so the blood doesn't rush to the head and you die in a couple of hours. So they bind them so it keeps the blood flowing very slowly through the body, and then they would make a little pinprick hole in the jugular so that the pressure would be relieved, so you would continually be dripping blood, and that way you wouldn't die quick, and you would last 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days until you died or you recanted, right? And sometimes even if you recanted, they would still kill you because, again, as a deterrent for others, right?
Yeah. Like I can't even fathom it. Like so many, and what I think what's occurring to me now is you hear about the Roman Christian martyrs, right? They feed them to the lions and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it seems so long ago. But when you start talking about this stuff in the 1600s, I don't know. And obviously it was a long time ago too, but it feels so more, approachable, real, relevant, like it I guess almost doesn't seem that much or that long ago.
Right. And it sort of makes me think of also the kind of like the terrorism, right? The terrorist approach, right? To if I make it so horrific, nobody's going to want to embrace the faith. Nobody will declare Jesus as the center of their lives and a threat to my power. And so it is amazing that is the thought process, or that is the political process, or the thinking outside. And it's hard for me to understand, because I can't think that way. So it's a very foreign mind, right? And so this whole idea of torture and dehumanization and all that stuff of these people, for us as Westerners, or for us as just as civilization has moved forward, to see that. But again, it's not that long ago, and it still happens. It still happens. Maybe we're not aware of it, but it still happens in the world where people are objectified and made, again, chattel, things, and not people, but things.
Well, and maybe, yes, there's still a lot of warfare, obviously, right now with this stuff that's going on, like in the Ukraine with Russia. Like, so the people still start wars to go take what they want. But I think the general methodology here is, if I want something nowadays, I'm going to do it through political or what's the word I'm looking for? Like financial, business kind of means, right? Like, I'm going to acquire or undercut you or whatever, right? Kind of take monetary actions or sanctions or whatnot, right? So it's not so much the physical torture and death, but maybe more so the public kind of torture part or humiliation part is still there. And if they can scare you into
there's financial oppression, right, or economic oppression.
Economic that's the word I was
threats,
looking for.
Right.
Yeah. And so today everything is so crazy right now. I can't help but think of, if you were to exclude death as the kind of the thought of what martyrdom is, right? Because these people were of course it's witnessing to the faith, but in these cases that we're kind of looking at, it's people are being killed, right? So if we take out the killed part, and we just look at people who are witnessing to the faith and then are being persecuted, how much is this happening in our society right now?
Oh yeah. And I guess for us, it's not even just the fact that it can happen to Catholics. As Catholics, if there is oppression of anyone, if anyone is oppressed as a Catholic, I have a moral, ethical obligation to speak up, to say something, to do something about that. I mean, very seldom do we talk about social justice, but social justice is part of the Catholic faith, and it doesn't mean what in the 50s was called the pinko communists, right? It's not about that. It's about the common good, and the common good is if those people are not taken care of, then somehow I am affected by that. I am affected by the oppression of the poor. Maybe not directly, but I am affected as a human person. That affects me. And the teaching of Jesus is that, that person is your brother as well. So the fact that you're not saying anything about your brother or sister that is being economically oppressed says something about your understanding of what it means to be my disciple. And so, yeah. And again, it's not a matter of imposing Catholic teaching on the world. It's about can we legislate gospel values of respect, human dignity, compassion, empathy, these things that we've talked about before. Those are the things that we as Catholics are called to bring about and open up the society that we live in to the gospel values. And by opening up to the gospel values, maybe not, maybe they'll embrace the faith, maybe they'll come to see Jesus as Lord. Maybe not, but at least we're in a country or in a political reality that allows respect and the dignity of the human person that they deserve, because they are children of the Father that is my Father as well. So yeah, there's a lot of questions that come up with this.
Yeah, and the whole kind of social justice thing right now. I always forget because I pay attention, but I don't learn any of the terms, like SJW, right? Like, is that social justice warrior or something like that, right? And
I have no idea. Yeah, that's above my pay grade.
But like I love the biblical teaching of what is equitable and just,
right?
Because like you'll in the same document, right? Same teaching. Jesus is like, sell everything you've got and go give it to the poor. But then he's also, like, in the Bible, it's also, and get to work, right? Like, don't just be there, the freeloader. Like, go work, go earn your keep, go, whatever, right? Like, even Paul writes about it, like the people who are among you, but they're just kind of freeloading, like don't put up with it.
Yeah.
So it is really kind of interesting how this call to justice and equity, I think that's the way to say it. It's based on that we're all children of God, right? So we are all worthy of the same respect, but we're all worthy of the same expectation as well.
Correct. And it doesn't matter if they believe or don't believe. The fact that you believe, you're obligated. You have responsibility. For example, in the United States, very few people ever talk about the poverty in Appalachia, the extreme poverty in Appalachia. And we're talking about, people who don't have water, people who don't have, things that we expect, like a bathroom. I mean, education, all those things. I mean, and we don't talk about it because, we don't want to. We're embarrassed or we're ashamed or we believe that the idea is, well, if they wanted to, they would do something about it. Well, if you're raised in that culture and you believe that there's nothing you can do about it, then you have to educate them that they can do something about it. And that's the first step, is you educate them and you help them understand that they don't have to live that way. And again, it is amazing to me. And a lot of times we turn blind eyes, right? So we, as a country, the most affluent, or one of the most affluent countries in the world, that within our country we have people who are starving. Mm-hmm. They have no running water. They don't have toilet. They don't have education. And of course, in that poverty and that ignorance, it's very much, talking about feudal lords, very much like the peasants and the peons of the Dark Ages. I mean, what? Really?
Yeah. Well, and it speaks to Jesus as martyr. What was the term or the title you gave him? Like King Martyr, or
the King of Martyrs?
Yeah.
King of Martyrs. Yeah.
Because God, it all starts like that witness. It starts with like entering into that reality with you, and that existence with you, right? So God comes down and enters into our existence with us, and just like you're saying, tries to teach us that there's something more, that there's a better way, that there's a different way, that just to kind of personalize and connect to us what our calling, what our true nature and our true calling is. And it kind of makes me
and I
think about...
I think
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that...
No, I insist. You go. It's like Chippendale, the Chipmunks. No, I insist. You go. You go first.
You
go,
I
insist. You go first.
You hang up first.
You go first.
It's funny. The witness, the martyrdom, it began before he was crucified, right? His whole existence.
Yeah.
was martyr, was witness.
Yes.
And it just makes me
witness,
think of
right,
people
witness.
who also witnessed, like Mother Teresa, right? Witnessed in
Yes.
her life. She didn't have to, be executed or anything like that. That was it.
Well, I'm sure she suffered, though,
Oh,
for
my
her
goodness, yeah.
radical stance. Yeah. And I was going to say, even just the election of Israel, I mean, God decided to choose Israel, not some huge, powerful civilization like the Egyptians or the Romans or Alexander the Great or any of those. No, just this little backwater people. And this is how he's chosen to manifest himself in the world, is through the poverty of Israel, the poverty of the human person. Look at Saint Peter. The poverty of Saint Peter as the Holy See, as the beginning of the Petrine office. I mean, there's a lot of those things in which we tend to look for the best and judge the best, whereas God says, like, no, actually, I use the weakest instruments for my purposes, and so that's something to take into consideration as well. And so, in our own estimation of the country and the civilization and where we find ourselves, again, there are a lot of people that are poor, a lot of people that are starving to death, and so, yet I have the in my affluence, I can go down and order a $5 coffee because I can, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a lot. And again, it's not about guilting people. It's not about guilting people. It's like, just be aware.
Yeah.
Be aware.
Well, and like, to give the Holy Spirit the permission to convict you, right? Because there are some people who have, like, millions of dollars, and they're not convicted to sell everything they have, but they are convicted to put their affluence to a good use, right? And so they start charities, or
Right.
they donate to
Right. Foundations
whatever.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily, like you're saying, not like shaming you for being able to buy a $5 coffee, or even liking a $5 cup of coffee from wherever you're getting it from. Yeah, and I think I think it encourages us, all this conversation about martyrs encourages us to reflect on, like, who or what am I persecuting? Maybe unjustly, right?
Unknowingly, maybe, right?
Yeah. And then what am I, in what ways am I being a martyr, bearing witness?
Right.
Right. In what ways am I
Right.
bearing witness? And I know there's people who, will lose their jobs over not being willing to compromise on their faith.
Correct. Yeah. It happens.
Yeah. Do you have any good, to put you on the spot, do you have any good kind of martyr stories? Just something that you yourself experienced, just maybe a moment of bearing witness to your faith, and it just kind of has always resonated with you, maybe encouraged you down the road? Or maybe someone you knew, right? If not necessarily you, but you found it encouraging.
I visited, and I'll talk a little about later on when I talk about Latin America in one of these episodes. Visited Guatemala when I was on the provincial council, and we went to Central America for a meeting of the different heads of the order, the Discalced Carmelite order. So we were meeting, and we met in Guatemala, and so we went to Santiago Atitlan, and that's where Stanley Rother, who is from the Diocese of Oklahoma, where he was martyred. He was martyred in Guatemala for speaking up for the poor. He translated the gospel into the native language there. He was threatened by the government. And so to go there and to And to see that this one person, this one priest, this one person was willing to stand up to the giant, the paramilitary government in Guatemala at the time, and to say, no, these are people. They are God's children. And he was assassinated. He was killed in his rectory. He's a martyr, and his cause is up. He's a blessed now. And they're building a huge basilica in Oklahoma to him, since he's a native son of Oklahoma. He was a diocesan priest. But that was, to me, was very moving. And his heart is buried there under the altar when he died, and they moved his body back to Oklahoma to bury him in the United States. The people there, the indigenous people there, they begged the family and the diocese, please, 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 let us keep his heart. And so they kept his heart. His heart is under the altar there in their church, and they loved him because he loved them. He saw them as his children. He saw himself as one of them. He loved them very much as a very fatherly figure, and yet he was willing to tell Goliath, no, these are people. And so to me, it was very, very inspiring. It was very like, wow, it was very moving to be there and to see his clothes that he had on when they killed him. You know, they had his clothes there on display in the church. And also the other witness was when I visited El Salvador, where Oscar Romero was martyred, to go and to see the hospital chapel where he was assassinated, to see he was celebrating Mass when he was assassinated, and to see his chasuble and his alb and all that, you know, with the bullet hole and blood stains, and to see it and like wow, man, that is amazing. Amazing courage, a courage to say like, no, these are people, these are God's children. So, yeah, those are things that are kind of like, man, very convicting.
Wow. Yeah, it just continues to give me so much to think about, you know.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap it up for this episode. We still have a lot more to talk about.
Yeah. So go out and buy the book by Indo Silence if you want to learn more about this period after the Shimabara uprising, or if you want to sit back and be a couch potato, you can watch the movie by Scorsese called Silence. It's a very good book. It's a very good movie. I had to watch the movie a couple times to understand it. I'm like, wow. Okay, so yes,
I might check out those.
Give witness to the Lord.
Tales of a Tory. I like a good
Tales of the Tory
fantasy kind of stuff. I like
fantasy. Oh genre. Yeah, there's like 5 or 6 books in it. So
good. All right. Well, thank you, Father, again. For
subscribe.
Yes.
Be witnesses.
If you're getting something out of this, please subscribe. And pray for us, and be strong, be of good courage, be witnesses in the world.
God bless.